This meeting of the Finance Standing Committee is called to order at 10:32 a.m. At this time, I'll take a roll call vote. Alderwoman Finlayson.
Present.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Present.
Alderman Huntley is present. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as written?
Move approval of the agenda as written.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Beautiful. And then to approve the minutes from our special meeting on May 9th, 2025. Is there a motion to approve those?
Move approval of the minutes from the May 9th meeting.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Beautiful. All right, we're on to, do we really not have any supplemental appropriations today? That's shocking. But we're on to our Art and Public Places Commission legislation. And this is 01125. I understand that there have been a lot of conversations around with the mayor's office around potentially having some amendments on this. I don't suppose, it doesn't look like we have Hillary here, but that's okay. Is there anybody from the mayor's office who can speak to that? Or maybe Ms. Buckland, have you been in those conversations? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Chris Jakubiak is on, and he probably is best positioned to speak to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Chris, you mind jumping in?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning. Yeah, I'm not aware of any amendments to the legislation that's drafted already. Not been briefed on any.
Okay. All right.
So can I intersperse?
Yes, Karma. Alderwoman O'Neill, go ahead.
As one of the sponsors of this legislation, I know that in writing the legislation, we spent a significant amount of time talking with both the mayor's office and Chris Jakubiak's office about the different roles of the liaison that's going to be from planning and zoning onto the commission. And so that's maybe what you're talking about when you say amendments. So there's text amendments talking about, who's in charge, what the role of the liaison will be, as well as what the role of the director is in determining what programs are moved and how the programs are moving forward. So there was significant talk about that. And I know that there was some discussion about leaving some of what we were asking to be moved out of the hands of the commission into the paid role of the city employee. But I don't know that any of those amendments have come forward.
So and we're just kind of having a free-form discussion at this point on it. But the number one issue that I had heard since this legislation came out that folks maybe felt like it wasn't totally addressing is a concern about ensuring applications get onto the commission's agenda. And if somebody applies, they shouldn't have to wait 3-4 months or potentially never get heard by the commission if they're applying. And so I think one of the ways we had talked about that being able to be addressed is if the commission staff, if the staff member who's in charge of it is, if they're receiving and vetting the applications, would they then ensure that all are placed on the agenda unless they're incomplete? And do we need to make it more clear that that should occur in the legislation?
If I may, to me, that feels like something that is part of the charge in some sense to the folks who staff that commission, and something that we can and should monitor, but I wouldn't include it in code, right? I wouldn't include that in legislation. I think that's something, I think that's a conversation item. And obviously, you know, Chris is here, you know, to hear that and can follow up appropriately, but I'm not sure I'd put that in legislation. I think that's more something for us to be aware of and to work on the back end. Chris, if you have a different opinion, speak up now, but that's just kind of how it strikes me.
I don't have a different opinion, but I can reinforce what you said. And there are amendments to this. You know, this ordinance does what the alderman is or addresses his concern. It says specifically the commission shall consider recommendations by the director before making any determinations on funding decisions or selection of projects. So what we imagine will take place is like with any board or commission that we staff, we will evaluate applications as they come in, provide staff reports, and the commission will be asked to review those recommendations, and it's being required that they establish findings of fact to support their decision making in each case. In terms of the getting applications onto the agenda, all the applications will get onto the agenda through this process if they're deemed to be complete. And they'll be evaluated.
So the magic words there, Director Jakubiec. That's the main thing I needed to know.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll stop there. Then fair enough. And you know, there's certainly criteria in the code that exist already. And that's the basis by which we compare whether they're complete.
Well, and I hear that. I think the idea that we want them to actually be complete makes a lot of sense. We wouldn't want to be considering incomplete application to be a waste of everybody's time, but also making sure that they are completed is important. Oh, there's Ms. Pettit. Did you have anything else to add on potential amendments to this legislation? As I understood, there was some talk of that within the mayor's office.
Yes, Alderman Huntley, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Just had some trouble with the Zoom logging in. So Hillary is going to join us. There were some final amendments that she was working through with you, I know, and we were just doing a final review of those, and Hillary should be able to join us and speak to the detail of those. But as far as I'm aware, that's the last changes that we have.
Okay, great. And my sense in talking with Ms. Hratovich was that she felt like the amendments that we were talking about ended up not really being necessary. And the biggest issue to me, why I thought maybe we needed them, was what we were just discussing and making sure that all of the applications receive a hearing. So that all complete applications receive a hearing. So that sounds good. Okay. Well, we can kind of put a pin in that until Ms. Hratovich joins us.
I'm on.
Oh, hey, there you are. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Yes, I would agree with everything Chris said about that the staff process will remove the need for that amendment. I think that the staff review, and just to add to what Chris said, not only will they make sure everything gets on the agenda that's eligible, they will also notify people who are ineligible what is the reason that they are not eligible. And that way, if there's something that can be changed to enable them to move their application forward, they'll know exactly what they need to do.
Great, thank you. And then a couple other sort of ideas that had been discussed were limiting the number of terms of the chair. And I understand the desire to not do that. And then, so sort of at this point, I'm just kind of throwing out some of the suggestions that were brought to me, and I'd like to hear from, I guess, Director Jakubiec or from our ombudsman about why these do or do not make sense. So one is limiting the number of consecutive terms that an individual can serve as chair. And then the other one is requiring some meetings be held in person. So either of the two of you, if you want to jump in and share your thoughts on
I'm
those.
happy to comment on that.
You go ahead, Hillary.
On the limiting the terms of the chair, it's inconsistent with most boards and commissions, and I'd like to have consistency as much as possible on the rules that apply to all boards and commissions. But if you did want to move forward with that, there was just a language change in the way the amendment was drafted. It said, for an additional 3-year term, terms for a chair are always 1 year by code. That's one of the overarching. Not the term that the individual's on the board, but the term for chairman. We require that all boards hold an election annually. And my other concern with that is just that sometimes you have a great chair and nobody else wants to serve. We did have that problem on another board where no one wanted to serve as chair. So that can be a challenge as well. That could be brought up by having term limits on chairs. And what was the other? I'm sorry.
On whether some meetings should be held in person. And I know this is something that is not consistent with other boards, right? Like we do not require that of other boards.
We do not require any boards by code to meet in person. Sometimes the director of the department affiliated with the code has asked some boards to meet in person, in particular quasi-judicial boards. And those are generally sometimes in person and sometimes not. I know for HPC, I don't know about the others. Chris can address that. But for non-quasi-judicial boards, there are none that are required to meet in person. And it does bring up problems with the public's ability to watch the meetings because we can't accommodate the broadcast and in person currently.
The only comment I would add, and Hillary and I have discussed this, and Hillary is absolutely correct in the approach we take to boards and commissions generally, but I would add that AIPPC in their recent meetings, and particularly in their recent training day, and they're looking at holding a second training day very soon, discussed how beneficial it was to meet in person and whether or not they should do that occasionally. So it might be, I think I'd very much like to hear Chris's view on this, because I know that he has asked some of the quasi-judicial boards to ensure they meet in person at least occasionally. And I don't think that's out of the question. This is not really a quasi-judicial board, but they do now manage a very significant budget. And that is part of the reason we wanted to put additional governance in place and staff support in place. And I do think as they work their way through some of the issues that have been evident in the Commission over the last few months, meeting in person occasionally, certainly their in-person training day was a very productive and positive day. And they all said we should meet in person more often. It's so much easier to discuss all our issues. So I would just offer that. I think there's a balance to be achieved, and I think the board is looking for that balance.
I agree. And some of our boards do meet quarterly in person, but not necessarily that it's in code that they must meet in person. My concern with it being in code is that then if they can't establish a quorum in person, that the meeting has to be canceled.
Director Kubiak, how do you think this would work in practice? It sounds like sort of what I'm hearing from other two folks here is doesn't make sense for it to be a requirement in code, but that it is beneficial for it to be a direction of the department. Is that sort of how you understand it as well?
Well, I think more so the direction of the individual board or commission through the adoption of the rules of procedure, and which they can amend from time to time. And that seems to work best. I generally favor having meetings in public and in person. I see how it works with the chemistry of the group, and they work together as a team more often. And I would encourage the commission to do that. And I think the chair and the members are inclined to do that. In fact, at least 4 times a year. And I suspect that what's going to happen is that the in-person meeting schedule will coincide with the new revamped method for selecting and allocating funds, so that big decisions are made at a meeting where people can come and sit in front of the commission, present their the reason, the rationale for their proposals, and the decision making will happen there in front of people. So but that's yet to be determined, and I don't think it needs to be codified. I think each board and commission can make its own decisions about when they meet and how they meet.
Do either of my colleagues have anything else you'd like to discuss about this piece of legislation?
Mr. Chair, I will move that we make a favorable recommendation to O1125.
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And thanks for everybody for hopping on to discuss that. I think unless I don't know if some of you maybe want to stick around for the fees and fines discussion. I don't know, but if that was all you're here for, feel free to hop off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have 1225, the street and park on Annapolis Street. And gosh, that's a hard thing to argue against. Street and park on Annapolis Street. That's pretty great. That's about as Annapolis as it gets. Alderman O'Neill, anything you want to say about this? I don't imagine it's going to be terribly controversial.
No, I'll just say that this would be the third park in Ward 2 in the last 4 years, which is really amazing. Once we can get funding and allocation for Northwest Street Park, that'll pretty much take care of the main areas where we want parks in Ward 2. Although we're also looking at the I forget what it's called, the park that's along Ralph Boulevard. I think that Gavin is calling it the Capitol Entry Park.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
Which I know will also be a big boost for the area as far as more recreation area, more green space. So I'm all for adding green space. And I had submitted a budget amendment to fund this park. So
excellent. That was going to be my question. Because we do have something of a fiscal impact on this. I think it's $14,500 plus $1,000 a year, something like that. But you're telling us that will be added within the budget, hopefully.
Hopefully, if the amendment passes, yes.
If the amendment passes, yeah. What are you cutting to put it in? We'll cover that on Thursday.
Right.
All right. Any further discussion on this one? No, I don't think we have Public Works here or Rec and Parks. All right. Is there a motion to make a favorable recommendation on R1225?
I'll make that motion for a favorable recommendation on Annapolis Street Park.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Well, now we get to the real fun stuff, the fees and fines. So jumping into our annual fee schedule, in a way, we've discussed a lot of this during the Finance Committee, so I think we shouldn't rehash that. But as I understand, really the two things we have to discuss about these two pieces of legislation, and Alderman O'Neill, Alderman Finlayson, jump in if there are other things you think. But on the fee schedule, I know there's still some questions around the outdoor dining, and so I'm guessing Alderman Arnett would like to speak to that. And then on the fine schedule, I think we need to talk some more about the amendment for the off-street parking fines. So rather than just kind of opening the floor on these two, because I know we have already discussed them in our budget meetings, is there anything else for either of these two that are specific topics either of you would like to discuss?
Mr. Chair, I do have a question, and maybe we can blame it on my memory, but I don't remember us having a discussion about the increase in refuse trash collection. I know we can
talk about it some more.
I'm sorry.
I think it was. I think it was part of our presentation from Stantec, but we can certainly talk about it some more now if you'd like to.
Well, here it speaks, Stantec was giving us a percentage. And here in the fee schedule, we see the actual dollar increase.
Right.
And, you know, we had talked at length about trying to limit the increase. And since we are still negotiating, I guess we have one more year in the contract with the current vendor. I'm just a little concerned there. You know, there's a $40 increase on refuse.
Right. Yeah. And I completely understand why you'd be concerned about that. I think generally speaking, we want to make sure that our revenues in those enterprise funds match our costs. And my understanding is that this is driven by the increased cost in that contract. So because we have it contracted out and because we have that contract with them that allows for them to increase costs to us as their costs presumably increase, I'm not sure how much control we have over that. Maybe the acting city manager could weigh in on that particular contract and what kind of, if any, flexibilities we have.
I do not believe we really have much in the way of flexibility in terms of the pricing. You know, the scope is what it is. The cost, you know, is associated with that. Without changing the scope, I don't think you can change the price. So, but that you are correct that those come up this next year, and obviously that's part of the discussion. That's one of the things we'll have to look at as that moves forward. That trade-off obviously will be in front of us at that point.
Ms. Giles, would it be possible? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alderman Phillips.
I was going to ask Ms. Buckland. I thought we were told during the Public Works hearing that they do have room for some negotiations this year, not as significant as the full contract. But I thought I remember Ms. Patrick saying that they will be having a discussion with them about potential increases. Did I misunderstand that, or?
I'll have to follow up with Ms. Patrick. I was mostly referring to just the overall costs, but let me circle back with her about what the degrees of freedom are within the existing contract for that kind of trade-off.
That would be great. I would just like a follow-up with that.
I can do that.
Yeah. And yeah, that's actually basically what I was going to ask as well. But I was going to ask the city attorney's office to look into it. Just if we could get a brief of what determines cost changes within that contract. Are they set to increase so much each year? Are they based on the cost of fuel? I think that was something that was mentioned, is the cost of fuel impacts it. And so I'd like to ensure that that's all just 100% above board in terms of those costs, that increased costs that we're seeing. And I think, Alderman Phillips, to your point, I mean, we could consider if we had some evidence that we are genuinely going to see decreased costs next year when we put the contract out for bid, then that could revise the projections within this enterprise fund and make it more reasonable to have less of a fee increase. But I'd want to have some kind of assurance that we actually have a reason to believe the cost would be lower after the contract was rebid. So I think there's also the possibility the costs get higher after the contract is rebid. Yes, I see the acting city manager nodding her head. That's a possibility. So,
well, I think
yeah, mostly. I'm sorry, just mostly that you don't know until you're in it, right?
I think we will have an opportunity to look at exactly what the contract entails. You know, when we initially went into this contract or this outsourcing, you know, we went from 2 days a week to 1 day a week. And there have been changes, subtle changes, you know, granted, but changes along the way since that significant change. So it will bear some reevaluation for next year. So I appreciate you looking into it, though. Thank you.
Yeah. So just so I'm clear on what the action item is, whether the city manager's office, or I think it might be more appropriate for the city attorney, but I'll let the two of you figure out who is best, just to get us a report on what is an allowable cost increase within that contract for trash the Public Works holds. I would appreciate that. Are there any other topics we want to bring up for fees and fines besides the garage, the off-street parking, or whatever we're calling it? I think it's actually metered parking, and outdoor dining. Yeah, Director Kubiak.
May I? Thank you. In reviewing the ordinance for this meeting, I noticed that there is a mistake in the submittal that our office provided the clerk originally. And if I could draw your attention to the fee schedule 21.56.040. It provides fees for certificates of approval within the historic district. Mr. Chairman, you're muted.
Don't worry, I was only saying dumb stuff, so please continue.
Okay. Are the members with me on that particular section?
I'm currently looking at it.
Well, I'll go ahead. You'll notice that there's a certificate of approval fee for public hearing application, and there's one for administrative application. Then there's one for after the fact, in quotes, after the fact public hearing application. Well, after the fact is something that implies someone did something without a proper permit, and after the fact, we're taking them through the process. And as it turns out, we didn't amend that section of the fee schedule. In other words, we didn't increase the fees on the people that actually avoid following the proper approach. So what I would suggest there is to change that cell in the table to increase it. And what I would propose, it read 1.5% of estimated cost, a minimum of $350 with a maximum of $5,000. So it's slightly higher, as is currently the case, than the applications that follow the proper procedure.
Director Jakubek, any particular reason that you're suggesting the new maximum be the same as the other ones, when previously the maximum certificate for an after the fact was higher than the other ones?
Yeah, because at some point, the fees have to be commensurate with the effort that we put into the applications, and we can't use the fees to penalize so much, or that's what the fines are for. And $5,000 just seems like an appropriate figure for taking applications through the process.
Okay, great. That makes sense to me. While we're on this subject, and what you're proposing around after the fact makes total sense, I'd be happy to see that written up as an amendment.
Okay.
Do you have an estimate of right now how many of the applications you receive, and now I'm not talking about after the fact, I'm talking about public hearing or administrative applications, how many of those fall between $35 and $250 in cost? Like, how many projects per year will we be bumping up this cost for, this minimum cost?
About 50. There's across the board where our fees for work in the historic district are well below any other location within the city or any other type of project. So across the board, we imagine almost every application would be bumped up to the new minimum.
Right. 12% estimated cost. Interesting. And so I guess I'm just a little bit worried about, the little old lady who needs to get her front steps fixed and lives in the historic district and is trying to make sure that those brick steps are not, messed up. It's a relatively small project, and the situation where going from $35 cost to $250 cost might be a significant increased additional expense on a job that might be under $1,000. Is that something that concerns you?
Yes, it does concern me. And yet that's roughly what the costs are in terms of staff time and resources. In fact, it's what the staff provides in terms of services exceeds $250 by quite a bit, even on small applications. And even the small applications can become quite complicated and require a lot of inspections and work with the historic district officer. But I hear your point, and I share the same concern.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I might need to think on this a little bit more. I like the way that we have this as a 1% of estimated cost, and I'm certainly fine with bumping up the maximum, but I worry a little bit about bumping up this minimum for at least for administrative applications. I hear what you're saying, that it really does cost us currently that much money, and that's the point of our fees. But boy, I sure would like to get that cost down rather than bump up the revenue side. So
Yeah.
Maybe you and I can discuss a little bit more what would be an appropriate way to address that while also ensuring that we are covering the cost of this service.
Okay.
So, and then in terms of your amendment for the after the fact, that will just get brought before the council for our full hearing on this, or did you want us to approve that in committee?
It's entirely up to the city council's discretion. I just wanted to make note of it in the event you wanted to change it.
Mr. Chair, I think it would be appropriate if we gave it a favorable recommendation.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. So, Director Kubiak, would you mind repeating the amendment so that Ms. Jackson can get it down? And then we'll hear a motion for a favorable recommendation on that amendment.
Okay. So the certificate of approval for an after the fact application that goes to the public hearing would change from 1% of estimated cost, minimum of $50, maximum of $2,000, to 1.5% of estimated cost, minimum $350, maximum $5,000.
Okay. Is there a motion to make a favorable recommendation on that amendment?
I'll make a favorable recommendation on the amendment that Chris just read to us.
Second.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alderman O'Neill, did you have your hand up for discussion, or were you just seconding?
I did second, and I think you answered my question when you reiterated his amendment. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the amendment that Director Kubiak has described, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. So let's talk then about outdoor dining fees. And I believe Alderman Arnett was the one who raised this question, so I'll give him the floor for a moment. But I think Director Moran has a quick response also, as I understand. So, Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the legislation 01024 creates in legislation, but apparently not in the Finance Department, a fee called Sustainable Mobility Services, and it's described in section, now amended section Title 6, 16020. There are two fees that are mentioned in the ordinance. One is for sidewalk fees, which is actually in Title 7, and in the fee schedule is referenced on page 5 of the fee schedule near the top. Interestingly enough, under 742.010, even though in the new legislation it's in Title 735.060. So I think there's some housekeeping to go on there. But then it also has the fees that are created for all the rest of the outdoor dining, which would be the parklets and the private and shared parking spaces and so forth. And that's should be in the fee schedule, I think, although I'll yield to people who know better. On page 3 of the fee schedule, there should be some insert, I believe, that would be Title 6, 16020, where the parking fee is created. And that's my red paper clip, wherever that is. And that is in the ordinance under this goes on forever. It's on page 7 of the ordinance, but it says fees associated with activities permitted under this chapter will be determined by annual resolution of the city council. That is this, and all fees generated shall be placed in the Sustainable Mobility Fund as described in 6.16.020. We neither have those inserted in the fee schedule, nor do we have fees for that other than the parking fee, which is currently at $380 for the sidewalk fees. We don't have fees for anything else. And I know Mr. Director Jakubiak has been working on that, but I think now is the time to know what those fees are proposed to be.
So I'm actually, before we go to Director Jakubiak, I would maybe turn it to Director Moran to talk a little bit about the process of creating these fees.
Yes, thank you. So finance has not been informed of the fees yet. Obviously, we're working with planning and zoning. When this ordinance was passed, we need to have some conversations on what the intended revenue stream is and the expenses. Transportation seems to be unclear as well, as it's going under their department, as what expenses are this revenue is being used for. Obviously, when we set up a fund, we have to have revenue and offsetting expenses. So we're just trying to get some clarification on what that intention is. Additionally, I don't know what parking areas this is encompassing, but some of this is a part of the concession situation. And for example, the market space parking is all collected through a separate lease agreement we have with them. And actually that is being reworked right now to where they're remitting the funds directly to premium, and we're not retaining it anymore because it's not our revenue. It actually has to go to premium as their revenue. And it because of the waterfall, it's coming back, but Chairman, you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm trying to keep you guys from hearing my dog barking. What I was saying is let's try then to limit this discussion to not the market space area, because I understand that's different for a couple different reasons.
Right.
It's totally separate. It's a totally separate contract.
Right.
So there are 4 outdoor dining situations. There's sidewalk dining, there's parklet dining, there's rooftop dining, which is not included in the legislation. And then there's dining in private parking spaces, which are of 2 kinds. One is shared parking, like in a mini mall, and then there's private off-street parking. And the legislation establishes that there will be a fee. And if you look on page 15, which you don't have to do now, of the ordinance, it describes what the Sustainable Mobility Service Fund is and the kinds of things that it would be used for. So it is creating an independent fee that is really flowing from some research done by Dr. Shoup out at University of California, Southern California that says when you're using public spaces, you're deferring your parking from a restaurant to a public space, you should charge a fee that is economically equivalent to the value of that fee, and you should return that equivalency to the affected parking areas. I think the city attorney has opined that that latter part may not be successful, and we'll have to deal with that. But the fund is established in code, and there needs to be a determination. Basically, this really is focusing on private parking, which would be a fee per space per month for that fee. And I know Director Jakubiak has been working on this, but now is the time to decide what that fee will be, because we'll be voting on it probably on the 2nd of June.
Right. So Director Jakubiak, do you want to update us on the process of developing that fee?
Yes, I'm in the midst of preparing a memo for the members of the council detailing the fee and how it's arrived at. There are two separate fees, actually. There's the on-street or cafe fee. Those fees can be set at your discretion. They don't need a lot of work. It's about what you feel businesses can tolerate and what's necessary. I don't know that there needs to be a lot of logic to that, although some logic is, of course.
Be careful, sir. Be careful.
Well, on the fees,
fees cannot be arbitrary.
Right.
Fees have to be based on the services the city provides to monitor, inspect, and authorize the kind of function you're talking about. They cannot be based on what someone thinks in their head people will pay. So we have to be careful in our discussion regarding this and have an analytical approach to how the fee is developed, as you first indicated.
Right. Well, I guess I wanted to draw a distinction between that set of fees and the fee that applies through the zoning mechanism Title 21, whereby in lieu of providing parking on site through some part of the year, businesses will shift their parking demand onto the public street or otherwise accommodate parking or mobility in a different way. There we have an important principle to establish a rational nexus between the fee and the impact that's being caused. And the fee has to be generally proportionate to the impact and, or essentially at least no more than the impact that we're trying to deal with. And this is complicated. And I have met with the several business owners from the Eastport area who asked to speak with me about the fee and share with me their concern about the fee amount. And I explained to them this approach to establishing a fee. But I'm not there yet, and I can't throw out a fee with you tonight or today without thinking through a little bit more and coordinating with some other staff in the city, including Jake, and I'd like to bring in the director of transportation too, since ultimately he's going to be in charge of administering this fee. So, but if you would just bear with me for a little bit longer, I would say by Wednesday next week we'll have everything we need, and it'll be vetted with the key people because we're meeting on Wednesday next week. But these fees are, they're going to be high, and because they have to be, unless but there's also the possibility that there are other means for individual businesses to deal with the impact. For instance, they might develop a lease agreement with a private parking. It'd be a cost to them, but it's not necessarily a revenue stream to the city. You see that we can't, if we place a condition on development approval, in this case we are placing a condition on development approval, it'd be reasonable for an applicant to address those impacts in a variety of ways, not just paying a fee. So we got to think through with the right number so that the purposes of the fund can actually be achieved, and there could be a revenue stream. And it's not quite as simple as a fee in lieu for tree planting, for instance, which we administer through the critical area program. Would it be acceptable to report back to the council on Wednesday or following Wednesday's meeting? Yes.
I think that makes sense. And I just want to check on the timeline. We are not intending to bring forward the fees and fine schedule next Tuesday at our meeting, right? That would not be on the agenda for then. I don't believe so. I'm pretty sure. So yeah, we have time. Okay. We good to move on to next issue?
Just one last comment. I mean, it is strange that we would have it be showing up potentially in two different places, one under Title VI and one under Title VII as the sidewalk fees, and it would seem to be consistent to have them. I mean, I guess they have to show up wherever they show up in the legislation, but it is a little confusing to try to find them. But that's a housekeeping issue. And I also agree with the director. I do think there needs to be a mechanism if people can provide relief from putting parking on the street, that makes everybody happy. And I think those costs should be recognized and be an offset. So I think that makes perfect sense. And Mr. Kubiak, I'd be happy to meet with you whenever it's appropriate to discuss those refinements further. But this suits my needs for discussion at the Finance Committee today.
All right, thank you very much. So the next thing on the agenda to talk about with the fees and fine schedule is, gosh, I keep saying the wrong title for it, but I think it is Alderman O'Neill. It was your amendment before the Finance Committee that to change the fee for metered parking or off-street parking, parking at expired meter. There we go. That is the title. And we talked about it some at the Finance Committee, but I understand the Finance Department has some remaining concerns about it, maybe the City Manager's office as well. So I figured now would be the best time to discuss it. So let's say, Alderman O'Neill, if you don't mind just reminding everybody what we're talking about and why we're talking about it, and then I will turn it to City Manager or Finance Department to discuss their concerns.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment is basically based on one of our parking operators coming to me and telling me that in the best interest of customer service, they feel that it's better, as opposed to the $50 fine that basically is written into code saying paid meter, when that's not really the case, that it is, if you've gone through the trouble of setting up your parking event, that it should be a $25 fee plus the cost of the parking if you failed to start your parking event. And then also a processing fee of $5.25. I know that there's concern about the concession agreement, and I'm happy to, talk through those concerns and hear those concerns. But the intent of this was to adequately portray what is actually going on. It's not an unpaid fee, it's an underpaid fee. And we are doing a disservice to our constituents by calling it an unpaid fee when they have in good faith often started the parking event. So that's our
Excellent. Thank you for that description. Alderman Finlayson, we've got two of you here. Oh, We're good. All right. So whether city manager's office or finance director, either one of you guys want to jump in with your concerns around this?
I'll jump in first, and then Brittany, if you want to jump in as well. So the issue here, I think there are a couple of things to point out. One is that by doing it this way, and the outreach, particularly the SP, which is the vendor who handles 3 of the 4, the way they've been handling that has allowed them to get more people actually registered in their system, to prevent this sort of thing. Once someone is registered with their license plate, then they're able to simply charge at cost. Sorry, working from home today. And the ease of doing that at the end of the day makes those garages easier to interact with, and hopefully then also makes them, people more likely to use them, right? People aren't disincentivized from coming down into these areas and patronizing our businesses and stuff because they don't want to deal with X, Y, or Z. So I think that intent, and they have the ability to do this. It is in line with what they're capable of. So I don't have a concern that way. The question that comes up then, of course, is Hillman. We have been, as you know, in very active conversations with them. This is only one part of the conversation with the concessionaire. And I know that there are concerns about what this does to the how this fits within the overall agreement. The subject has been broached with them, so this shouldn't come as a surprise. And I think that the framing of this as an underpayment, I think, helps that discussion by giving us a more nuanced way of talking about how fees are done, and what those fees are intended to cover, differentiating between underpayment and I didn't even try to pay, right? So, will there be nuances for us to work through? Yep, there will be. But I do have some confidence that we will get to the other side of that. Brittany, I know, has obviously her charge is to look at this from the financial perspective. This does have consequences on the financial side. And Brittany, if you want to speak to that part of it.
Yes. So everything that I had, my thoughts, you pretty much summed up. From a finance side, my concern is not the way that you're trying to or attempting to change the structure. It's that premiums process right now does not allow that type of charging of a fee. That's just not the way their system works. So yes, we are not able to direct them to have a new system, but also they have to follow our laws, our code. So if the code forces them to then create another system or acquire a new system and process a way that allows that may be an unknown charge to us. There's going to be a change order likely after speaking with the Office of Law. There could be a change order. We could be forced to pay for the system. This could mean that they could potentially default in this process. There's just a lot of other hoops to jump through, being that their system doesn't allow this type of processing of the fee. So my only concern is that maybe maybe the structure has changed premature to them being able to accommodate that. And that might be for someone else to speak on what the process of allowing them to change their system, knowing this is an upcoming change in the code. My concern is that we have people banging on finance door saying this is now the charge that's supposed to be $25 and plus, but I'm still getting a $50 fine because that is the way that premiums operations work. So that's just my 2 cents. And then also I did follow what Alderman Huntley had said and also Alderwoman O'Neill. It is relatively, it would be net revenue based on 4 hours of an average parking meter. Obviously unknown, but projections wise, yes, it should be net revenue.
Is that is that true for all 4 of the garages? Understanding that there are some different rates. Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yep. Relatively, it's about net revenue. Now we can revisit, of course, but pulling all the pieces in, it's approximately net revenue.
Yep. Gotcha.
Can I input for just
Absolutely.
1 second, Chair?
Yeah, go ahead. You have the floor.
I don't have the ability to find very easily my hand up. I appreciate both sides of that. And I just want to make 2 points. One, in January of 2023, we were told by the then regional director of Premium, that they quote unquote own the code. So when we've been discussing this for over 2 years and the issues going on, at that time we were told that they own the code. I just want to make that very clear. The second part is we have been discussing this for over 2 years, and I know that we're in active negotiations with them, but over 2 years to fix a problem that directly affects our constituents on a daily basis, to me seems like we need to move forward. And I know that things take a long time, but our constituents are frustrated. And I hear every day of people that are refusing to park downtown. And I think that I see it. Every time I go by the garage, there are significant numbers available parking spaces. So people are using the garage less and less because they're frustrated. And that's not to say that everybody is quitting, but there is a lot of frustration out there. And I think that we need to do what we can to get the needle moving on this and get it fixed before it's too late. So those are the 2 things I wanted to say. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that urgency. So just to procedurally on this, it has been the change that Alderwoman O'Neill described has been favorably recommended already by the Finance Committee as part of our budget discussions. So really all that would be on the table would be to somehow rescind our previous favorable recommendation. I'm not inclined to do that.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just towards the Office of Law, what happens if one process becomes before the next and we do change the code and they're not complying with the law? Like, what if they are sending out violations that are still the $50 because that's the only way that they can send them out? Who is liable for that, and how does that work?
That presents a variety of circumstances. One, someone who is given a ticket has the right to go to court to challenge that ticket. 2, people could not pay, and then we could be forced to file some kind of action. 3, we could let the whole system break down and see what happens, and if the premium comes to the table and figures out a way to resolve it. Or they could change the system to meet the code, and then send us a bill for the costs in changing the system, which is probably the likeliest result. They will comport with the code. They will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars changing the system and then send us an invoice, or deduct it from our waterfall payment. but there are a lot of likely scenarios. I just laid out a few, but I'd have to see what happens in action to be able to describe. This is just all hypotheticals at this point.
Sure. And in that hypothetical, if the city does not have control over what those costs are to make that change, but we are liable for those costs, how do we ensure that they don't just pay their buddy $2 million and then charge us for it?
We don't.
These are all my concerns financially.
Yeah. So this was why, in some sense, I this is why I referenced this is one piece of a larger conversation with them around how that system works, performance under the contract, compliance with the various terms of the contract. They obviously have, that same interest in holding us to the terms of the contract, but we have interests on our side. And so what I want to make clear is that this particular move is in the context of several things. It's not the only thing that's on the table. And so in some sense, I don't want us to, yes, we might end up with some effects like that. We obviously are going to have to pay attention to that, but I don't want to presuppose what on net the impact to the city is, because the on net impact is the sum of the various things going on with them, not just this.
Are you able to provide data on the percentage of the projected revenue, the percentage of the $50 fine of the projected revenue? So when they did their projections, when we did our projections, when we were signing the contract, how much of the projected revenue was based on the $50 fine?
I can get back with you on that.
Yeah.
I think we do have
appreciate that.
data on how much has been coming in from that fine. I know
Yes.
that, but
So
I
not on projections, but on actuals,
Yes.
we know that about 350,000 is coming from issued citations. However, we have another issue with the vendor and collection and ability to collect and enforce. So if you just look at the change from the 50 to the 25 and you take out the metered portion, it would be about 350,000 in citation revenue. But if collections is 50%, it's 125,000 on an annual basis.
But
I'll
that's
get back
not
to you.
accounting for the fact that we are now charging with this change, charging for the amount of time people spend in there.
Correct. Which would the time spent in would equate to about the $25 difference.
Got it.
But I can follow up on what the projection was when the deal was done.
Yeah. I am very aware of our additional conversations with the vendor, and that this is occurring in the context of that and the context of needing to see many changes from them. I think that those conversations haven't resulted in the changes that residents are demanding and that the council feels are important. And so I'd like to move this forward as one part of really trying to take a little bit more of an aggressive stance, I guess I'll say. So, again, we already voted on this, so I don't think there's any need for a motion, but Alderwoman O'Neill, anything else you want to say on it? Alderwoman Finlayson, anything you have to jump in with?
I'm all set.
Take that as
My only comment would be at this point, hopefully the vendor will take it a little more seriously if they see that we're moving forward with the amendment that's been proposed.
okay. So the last thing I want to discuss about the fee and fine schedule is, hopefully this is a relatively easy question, but I have legislation that's getting introduced this coming council meeting that will require an additional fine, and I think an additional fee too. I gotta double check. And so what I don't want to have happen is we introduce the legislation, we pass the legislation, and then we got to go back and create a new resolution to alter the fee and fine schedule. So at least I'm seeking some guidance from both our finance department and maybe more importantly from the city attorney on what the most appropriate way to bring forward those new fines in the fine schedule, given that we might not have the legislation itself passed by the time we bring forward the fine schedule. Could we add the fine in before there is a violation in code? Just kind of getting some advice on what the process of that should be.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of confused at what you're trying to get at.
Sure. So maybe let me rephrase it more simply. On Monday, I'm going to introduce legislation that will define a penalty, a violation in code, and makes note that there will be a fine set. And so my question is, to avoid having to bring forward a whole separate resolution that would add that fine into our fine schedule, could we simply amend the fine schedule before the ordinance is passed? And I see Mr. Trudeau has his hand up. I'd like to hear from the city attorney and then.
Yeah, I'm not so sure you can do that, but I hesitate to make that definitive. I'd like to do some research on it and get back to you. I couldn't say today.
Okay.
But it doesn't sound like it's in order, because you need the authority to have the fine or fee first before imposing it. Now, imposing it or putting it in a schedule, it would not mean anything without the authority. So there is that.
Right.
But you hesitate to do things like that for a lot of different constitutional reasons. But I think you would need to have the authority first and then the resolution after.
Mr. Trudeau, you got anything to add on that?
I'll just say any changes that you have to the fees and fines schedule after it's adopted will then be reflected. So, for example, my fiscal note would say that this would amend the current year fees and fines schedule.
Right,
So
but that would require a separate resolution to state.
Correct.
Correct.
So I'm sorry to break in with a question. I believe, and I'm asking Mr. Lyles if my memory is correct, or Alderwoman Finlayson and Alderwoman O'Neill may well remember. I believe we've had legislation that not only established the authority for the fee, but incorporated a reference to adding that fee to the fees and fines schedule, so that you did both things in a single piece of legislation.
Yeah, she could do that.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then I will talk with Ms. Ryder about that. That's much easier. I thought we would have to have a separate one. So, okay, great. So at this point, just on the floor for either of my colleagues, is there anything else you'd like to discuss about either the fee schedule or the fine schedule we haven't covered yet? Alderman Arnett would like to discuss something. Yes, turn it to you.
So I note on the fine
Our ex officio colleague.
Yes. I note on the fine schedule on page 3, there is a fine for sidewalk cafe violation, but we don't have a similar fine for the off-street parking or parklet violations. I'm not sure it's critical. I don't know how many violations we have, but given that we now have passed the ordinance establishing that, it does seem that there should be a commensurate fine for violations for the other kinds of outdoor dining.
That makes sense. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I also had a note about a need for an amendment on a particular fine, but now that I'm looking at it, I'm not seeing that my note was not clear enough. So I'm going to have to follow up on that. So the Finance Committee has already made some recommendations for amendments to the fines and fees schedule. I don't think we've heard any new ones proposed today. So what I'd like to do is to make a favorable recommendation on both of these resolutions with the amendments that the Finance Committee has already recommended as part of our Finance Committee report. Ms. Jackson, you came on video. Like, do you have a question about that?
Director Jakubiec, did he not?
Yes, thank you. We did have the amendment from Director Jakubiec. So yes, the motion would also include the amendment from Director Jakubiec that we've favorably recommended.
I'll second that motion.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Alderwoman Finlayson, you're on mute. Did you say aye?
Aye, yes.
Yeah, I saw you move your mouth, but I wasn't sure. Okay, 3 ayes for favorably recommending both R 2125 and R 2025 as with the amendment that the Finance Committee just approved today on the fee schedule in regards to historic properties, and also with the amendments that the Finance Committee has already recommended as part of our Finance Committee report for the budget. So moved. So last, we've got our Finance Department update, and yeah, just look to hear that from Director Moran.
You have to go back because it needs a second and a voice vote.
No, I made the motion and it received a second from Alderwoman O'Neill, and there were 3 ayes.
Okay.
Okay. So update on finance. We still have an opening for the deputy position, but it's kind of been at a halt for right now. We have a lot going on in our department, and we haven't received any applications that were really technically qualified to really add value. So we are back to the drawing board, and Vicki and I have been talking with HR, the department, and trying to figure out where our needs are and how we can structure the department. So we need resources, but it's a work in progress. We have a couple people shifting around to help in other areas. We have Jody still contractually on board, and she's going to assist with the audit, and hoping that she can train the staff that we do have to take on a lot of that responsibility and just, you know, a brain dump of her knowledge before she exits. It feels like we just finished the audit, but we are approaching year end already. So which is scary for us in terms of the downtime between the two.
Plus, you get the budget passed.
Yep. So there is no downtime, you know? So, yes, obviously just in the thick of budget and trying to get through that. And then kind of get our feet on the ground. For debt, we are in conversation with Davenport, and we have a meeting next week, Jody, me, and some of the team, to try to figure out what our plans are for debt issuance and our cash flow, and whether we still have enough unused proceeds, which we have traditionally. So that's to be determined right now. Obviously, you know that the bond is part of the upcoming budget, so we are trying to look at that as well. So stay tuned.
Thank you. And anything you, or maybe it's more appropriate for Budget Manager Trudeau to weigh in, any updates you'd like to share with us about the process of developing the budget? I think we're all, you know, that there's pretty well informed people here about it, but anything else you have to say that we might not know?
No, sir.
All right, easy.
I do have one request, and I know that Jake would also appreciate if during all of this, everyone could just maintain learning points, process improvements. We would really, really, really like to change the way some things are done, just to save everyone time and effort, and just make it as transparent and efficient as possible. So we appreciate all feedback, and we're hoping to circle back with everyone very prior to the next budget cycle to get a better process, especially with the new administration coming in. So we just ask that you take some notes in your spare time.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I'll tell you, taking notes is exactly what I've been doing. So
Thank you. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
I think there is a better way we could do this, and I think there's some things we've done better this year, and I think there's still opportunities for improvement. So I appreciate that you're bringing that eye towards things. I love to have an entrepreneurial eye, always looking at things from the lens of how do we make this a little bit better. So thank you
Helps
for
us all.
any questions for the finance director or comments for the good of the order. Alderwoman Finlayson, Alderwoman O'Neill.
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Beautiful. All right.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Who knew that was going to be as easy as it was? Get through that fine and fee schedule. All right. Well, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned at 11:48 a.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.